So most of the time when we're out shooting, it might be a little more towards the afternoon where that side lighting situation we talked about is going to be what we're dealing with the majority of the time. But sometimes we do really get out there at high noon and that sunlight is directly overhead, and that's a problem when we're shooting without any shade in sight because these photographs are going to look like this. You're going to notice that we have a really heavy shadow under her chin, we've got heavy shadow under the eyes, and again, she's doing a lot of squinting because she's in direct sunlight. So in most situations, we could do what we just covered and spin her around, put her completely in shadow, and walk away with a great portrait. But sometimes that sun is just too high in the sky, and no matter where you place her, she's going to have some kind of shadow going on. So this is where we're going to go ahead and embrace this direct sunlight by finding a higher vantage point and simply shooting down at her. So if I can have you sit down for me right there. Now by having her lower than you as the photographer and then having the subject raise her chin just a little bit up, so there we go, just like that, all of a sudden, 1, 2, 3, beautiful. When she opens her eyes and smiles, now we have nice, low contrast, even lighting on her face. So you're seeing what we're going for here, guys. When we're not using any kind of modifiers, no lights, no reflectors, we're just trying to minimize the contrast in the photograph by working with the direction of the sun, either completely in her face or completely behind her. And that's going to give us low contrast, and it's going to give us shadow-free areas where we're not drawing attention to any wrinkles or blemishes, so we create a flattering portrait. You know, when you're in a direct sunlight situation like this, having your model look up into the sun is going to get her to tear up really quickly. So this technique where you're actually embracing the direction of the sun is best left for those overcast days, because even on an overcast day, the quality of the light might be different as it's diffused by the clouds, but the direction is still going to remain the same. So people think, oh, overcast day, you know, it's going to be perfect weather for photographs. Well, yeah, if you go out, you do have soft diffused light, but the direction, if you're not careful, will still give you the shadows under the eyes, under the nose, and under the chin. So this technique works better on a little bit of an overcast day, simply elevating your position or having your model sit or stand a little bit lower, having them bring their chin up to look into the camera with the sun right behind you, and those beautiful low contrast photos like that. But in a direct sunlight day like today, I would recommend doing the other technique where we turn their backs to the sun and then embrace the shadow. It's going to be a lot easier for her to look into the camera and get a lot more natural smile, and you're not going to have the fatigue in the eyes from all the squinting either. All right, so these aren't the only two options that you have when you're working out here. Shade is actually going to be your biggest ally when you're out here working with no equipment on location. So next we're going to jump into a section where we cover shade, how to find it, what you're looking for, and then how to embrace it for better portraits. All right, so I just talked about shade. Again, this is your biggest ally when you're shooting on location. Understanding the direction of light is still going to be important. It's the basic tenet of what we're doing out here when it comes to that direction, that contrast. But shade is going to be the biggest thing that we can do to redirect that light. We can't very well move the sun. We just covered how we can move our subject in relation to the sun. But by using shade, we can block the sun so that the light is bouncing off of other surfaces, and then we can change the direction that it comes back into our scene. So the easiest kind of shade to find is open shade. Open shade is if you look straight up, there's nothing directly overhead. That's why it's called open. The easiest way to find this, and why it's the most common kind of shade you'll probably use, is because any building is going to cast shade 90% of the day. Other than high noon, the sun's going to be coming up or setting, and one side of that building will be casting a shadow with nothing above it. So take a look for those buildings after the sun starts to move past that solar noon, and you're going to find a beautiful area like this. And if you look at the street now, you're going to notice that we've got this shadow line jutting out into the street, but then look at how bright everything is around it. That is now your light source. So the sun's behind the building, screaming over, bouncing off the parking lots, the walls, the other buildings, and then bouncing back into your scene. So it's like the whole world has become this giant reflector. So if we go ahead and take this photograph now, I'm still in aperture priority mode, and now I'm just going to go back to my matrix metering mode, which is where we stay most of the time unless we're in a heavy backlit situation, and let's go ahead and see what this light looks like. So it actually looks really beautiful. We don't have all that nasty contrast that we had when we were in direct sun. Now we've got light coming in from all kinds of different angles to give us that beautiful wrapping light. Let me go in really close and get a shot of her eyes and a close-up of the face, and you can actually see the reflection of the light source, which is this parking lot and the streets behind us. So if you look really closely into those eyes, you can see that the light source, with the highlights in her eyes, stretch all the way across from the right to the left side of her eye and even up a little bit. That's the beauty of this open shade, is like we have soft boxes above her, to the front of her, to the left of her, to the right of her. I don't even own that many soft boxes, and I don't even need to have them out here if I did, because we just walked over, found some open shade, and we got a beautiful shot just like that. All right, so now we're looking for covered shade. This is a little more difficult to find. Covered shade can be pretty small sometimes, but I'll tell you what, even a sliver of light like this that you're seeing down here on the ground is a great opportunity to, again, change the direction of our light. With open shade, we have light coming in from the top, from the left, from the right, from behind me. It's a lot of direction of light, and because we've got so much light coming from different directions, whatever shadow one direction creates is filled in by the other. So yes, we get low contrast, beautiful light, but it's not very directional. So if I want a little more direction and focus to where my light's coming from, I like covered shade. So if you step forward for me just a little bit here, we run into the same problems we did earlier with this direct light. We get tons of contrast, we get harsh highlights and harsh shadows here. It's just too much. It's too much for our camera to really control and be able to put into an image with a dynamic range. At the same time, this hard side lighting here isn't doing us any favors. We've got a beautiful model, we're making her squint. So if we simply have her take a half step back into the shadows, all of a sudden, instead of our light coming from the side here and creating all this havoc, the light is now being forced to bounce off of the world out here and pushed in from one direction into the shadows. Where open shade light was coming from all kinds of directions, with covered and closed off shade like this, it's forced to just come in from the front. So our camera settings again, I'm sitting here at f3.2, I'm in aperture priority mode, I'm in matrix metering. We're gonna stay there for most of our portraits because she's not heavily backlit. Our cameras can do the math on this pretty easily. I'm gonna go ahead and take another shot now and show you how much of a difference it makes simply moving there half a foot. And now with this newfound direction of light, we can start playing around. Just like in the studio, if you'd move a softbox around, the direction would change. Maybe let's try to add a little bit of contrast here. So far, we've been eradicating contrast altogether, but some movement to the light actually creates more depth in 3 dimension. So I'm just gonna walk around here and grab a couple of variations of this portrait, and we'll see what they look like. All right, just as a little bonus aside here, when you have such controlled and small areas of shadow here with this covered shade, a lot of times your shadow line is gonna be right there and you can really start to flirt with that bright sunlight again. I noticed when I was going from the side, I was able to get a shot that was kind of neat. Like I said, this direction of light is coming in from one way only, so by turning her over, now we have a highlight and a shadow side, but it's much more controlled and subdued, but I saw the sunlight start to peek through her hair. So I'm gonna walk back around again and have her just sneak out of the sun slightly with her hair and see what it looks like if we let her hair catch some of that light. Excellent, I'll have you turn your face a little more this way and then full step out. Beautiful, here we go. So now you see we're starting to build on these principles. We're finding open shade with all the direction. Covered shade is going to give us a more single direction of the light so we can get a little more good contrast in there. And then remember how we initially turned her back to the sun? By using some covered shade and this fine line of highlight and shadow here that the building's casting for us, I was able to use that as kind of like a hair light. So you can really start to take all these concepts and build them together and walk away with some killer portraits, a lot of control, a lot of diversity, and again, we haven't used a single light modifier yet. So let's go ahead and examine the photos that we just took here and see what we can improve on, and then look at maybe bringing in a reflector here to add a little something extra to our shots.